Zyra had never failed a mission in her entire life. Among her people, failure was considered worse than death, and she had been trained since birth to be the perfect weapon. Her species lived far beyond the edge of the Milky Way, on a cold, metallic world where emotions were seen as flaws and compassion was a word no one ever spoke. She had been chosen not because she was strongest or fastest, but because she was the most precise. When she received the sealed command from the high commanders, she did not hesitate for a single moment. Orders were not to be questioned. They were the only truth she had ever known. The message was brief and cold, like every mission before. It carried only a name. Dr. Mason Hale, a human scientist from a small blue planet called Earth. The data package said he was developing a new form of energy, one that could allow humans to cross galaxies faster than light itself. To Zyra's superiors, this was dangerous. Humans were considered a young and reckless race, full of chaos and unpredictability. If they gained the ability to travel the stars, they could spread their disorder across the universe. The solution was simple. Eliminate the human before his work was completed. End the threat before it began. Zyra accepted without emotion. She studied his Imageman with dark, thoughtful eyes and a calm expression. He did not look like someone who could threaten entire civilizations. But Zyra knew appearances meant nothing. Many of her past targets had looked harmless, yet they had carried secrets that could destroy worlds. She uploaded every detail about Mason into her memory. His age, his location, his habits. He lived alone in a countryside house far from the crowded human cities. That would make things easier. No witnesses, no noise. Just a clean, silent elimination. Her ship was prepared within an hour, sleek and black. Like a shard of night, it could bend light around itself and move unseen through human skies. Zyra stood inside the launch chamber, her body encased in the living armor of her people. The armor pulsed faintly with her heartbeat, adjusting its shape to her every movement. Around her, the silence of the warship felt like home. No voices, no distractions, no feelings. Only purpose. As the launch doors opened to the endless void of space, she felt the familiar, cold focus settle over her mind. There was no room for doubt. Doubt got you killed. The journey to Earth was long but uneventful. Zyra spent most of it in stasis, her mind suspended in a dreamless sleep while the ship crossed millions of kilometers of empty darkness. When she finally awoke, the planet filled her view like a glowing marble blue oceans wrapped around green and brown continents, swirled with white clouds. It looked soft and fragile compared to her iron world. Her people called it primitive. Zyra only saw a target. She activated the camouflage systems that would hide her ship and her own appearance. Humans could not know what she truly looked like. Her natural form, tall, silver-skinned, and blade-thin, would terrify them. She allowed the transformation nanites to weave over her body, reshaping her into something human. Dark hair, warm skin, soft round features. When she saw her reflection, she felt nothing. This new face was only a mask, a tool for the hunt. Before entering the atmosphere, she reviewed the mission one final time. Land unnoticed. Locate the target. Eliminate him quickly and silently. Retrieve any research data and destroy the rest. Leave no trace. That was all. She repeated the words in her head like a sacred code. It helped drown out the faint, strange unease that flickered inside her. She told herself it was only the shift in gravity, the unfamiliar light of a yellow star. Nothing more. Her ship cut through the clouds like a shadow, unseen and silent. She landed far from human eyes, in the dense forest that surrounded Mason Hale's home. As she stepped onto Earth's soil for the first time, she felt the soft ground sink under her feet. The air was warm and alive with sounds rustling leaves, distant bird calls, the hum of insects. It was nothing like the sharp, dead silence of her own planet. For a moment, she paused, listening. It was strange, almost pleasant. She quickly pushed the thought away. This world was not hers to admire. It was her battlefield. Zyra climbed to the highest branch of a towering tree and crouched there, her sharp eyes scanning the landscape. She saw the house in the distance, a small structure of stone and wood, tucked away behind a winding dirt path. A thin thread of smoke rose from its chimney. There was no one else nearby. No neighbors, no guards, no defenses. He lived in isolation, completely unaware that death had already arrived for him. Zyra focused her vision until she could see through the windows. Inside, Mason Hale moved slowly around his lab, adjusting glowing instruments and scribbling notes. He looked peaceful, completely absorbed in his work, unaware of the danger waiting beyond the trees. She watched him like a hawk watches prey, studying every gesture and movement. There was nothing threatening about him. He seemed small, fragile. It would take only one strike to end his life. She placed her hand over the concealed weapon at her side. It would be easy. One quick shot, and the mission would be over before he even knew she was there. Yet for reasons she could not explain, she stayed in the shadows, just watching, waiting. She told herself she was only looking for the perfect moment, the cleanest path. But deep inside, something unfamiliar stirred a faint hesitation she did not understand. She ignored it and whispered the words. Her people always spoke before a kill. For order, for silence, for home. The wind carried her voice away as the sun sank behind the hills. Soon the human would sleep, and when he did, she would strike. The night swallowed Zyra as she moved through the forest. Her steps silent, her presence thinner than mist. The human world felt heavy and warm compared to the cold emptiness of space. The soil pressed softly beneath her feet. The air clung to her skin like an invisible veil, and strange scents drifted everywhere: wet leaves, wildflowers, distant smoke from Mason Hale's chimney. It was overwhelming, almost suffocating. Her own world had no smell, no warmth, no softness. Everything there was sharp and clean, like polished blades. Here, everything was. Alive, Zyra hated how it made her pause. She crouched on a moss-covered rock and stared toward the house where her target lived. The windows glowed with soft yellow light, flickering faintly as shadows moved inside. Mason Hale was still awake. She had expected him to be sleeping, but instead he worked late, pacing from one side of the room to the other, lifting strange human tools, pressing glowing buttons, writing notes with long strokes of ink. His concentration was intense, as if the entire universe balanced on the edge of his thoughts. Her mission data said he was brilliant, far beyond most humans, but seeing him now felt different than reading a report. He wasn't just lines of code or cold statistics. He was alive, breathing, thinking, moving. That realization unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. She slid silently from the rock and crept closer, blending with the night. Her camouflage shifted to match the dark soil and the pale shimmer of moonlight, until even the forest seemed to forget she existed. Every few meters, she paused to watch, to listen. The forest hummed softly, alive with distant crickets and whispering leaves. Sometimes she thought she heard footsteps behind her, but when she turned, there was only the wind. This world was so noisy, and yet strangely peaceful. When she finally reached the clearing's edge, she stood only 20 paces from the house. The building seemed fragile up close, just thin walls of wood and glass. On her world, nothing could be broken by hand. Everything was forged from living metal and stone, harder than diamond. She wondered how humans could feel safe sleeping in such delicate shells. She crouched and peered through the window. Mason Hale was speaking to himself as he worked, his voice low and calm. The sound startled her. She had never heard a human voice in person before. It was rougher than she imagined, yet gentle too, like the murmur of a stream running over smooth stones. He picked up a thin metal frame, turned it toward the light, and smiled faintly at something only he could see. The smile tugged at the corners of his face like sunlight breaking through clouds. Zyra didn't know why her chest tightened. When she saw it, she shook the thought away. Emotions were distractions. Distractions got you killed. She needed to get inside. Silently, she moved to the far side of the house, where shadows pooled under a sloping roof. A single window stood slightly open, just enough to slip through. Humans never expected predators who could climb walls like insects. She scaled the wall with effortless grace, her fingers digging into the wood as if it were soft clay. The sounds of the forest faded behind her as she entered the house. Inside, the air was warmer and thicker, filled with strange scents: paper, metal, faint traces of soap, and something sweet she could not name. The floor creaked faintly under her weight. She froze, waiting. No alarm sounded. No guards rushed in. Mason Hale remained in the next room, unaware that death now moved silently through his home. She stayed hidden in the shadows, watching him from behind a shelf of books. His hands moved quickly across a glowing screen, pulling up shifting patterns of light schematics for an energy device. She recognized pieces of the design. If completed, it could pierce through the barriers of space, opening gates to distant star systems. For humans, that would be like giving fire to children. Her mission's logic was clear: destroy the threat. But as she watched him, something strange stirred again. Mason didn't look like someone building a weapon. He looked like someone chasing a dream. His eyes lit up with quiet wonder, as though he could already see the distant worlds his machine might reach. He spoke softly under his breath about bridges between stars, about not being alone anymore, not being alone. The words hit her like a silent blade. On her world, everyone was alone. Connection was weakness. No one spoke of dreams. No one looked at the stars with wonder, only with hunger. Zyra forced herself to look away. This was not her world. He was not her kind. He was only a target. Still, she did not strike. She could have done it, then ended his life with a single shot from the shadow. It would have been silent, clean, perfect. But her hands stayed still. Instead, she studied his movements like she was memorizing them. The way he pushed his hair back from his face when he concentrated. The way he tapped his fingers on the desk when deep in thought. These tiny human habits meant nothing. Yet her mind kept catching on them as if they were threads tangling around her focus. Hours passed. The moon drifted high above the house, and the forest grew quiet and still. Mason finally yawned, stretched, and turned off the lights. He left his lab and disappeared into another room. Soon, the house went dark and silent. Zyra stayed crouched in the shadows long after he was gone, her heart beating faster than it should. She had never delayed a mission before, never hesitated. Yet here she was, sitting in a stranger's home, surrounded by his soft human world, unable to move. This was supposed to be simple, quick, clean, but nothing about this felt simple anymore. Asterisk. For the next several days, Zyra became a silent shadow circling the edges of Mason Hale's life. She never let him see her. She moved like wind through the trees, like moonlight slipping through his windows, near, never known. Her mission should have ended already. By her people's standards, she had already failed. A clean kill was meant to be swift, without delay or thought. But something in her refused to move forward. As if her sharp precision had dulled the moment she saw him smile at his work. Each morning, she watched from the forest as he stepped outside, blinking into the sunlight, his hair messy from sleep. He always carried a mug of something steaming, pausing to breathe in the morning air before disappearing back into his lab. She followed him with eyes sharper than any predator's, memorizing his every movement, every small pattern. Humans fascinated her more than she wanted to admit. They were soft, slow, and unarmored. Yet they carried themselves like creatures who had conquered the stars already at night. When his lights burned late, she crept into his lab while he slept in another room. Her footsteps made no sound. Her breath barely stirred the air. She moved among his machines and stacks of papers, reading everything she could without leaving a trace. His handwriting was chaotic yet beautiful, like storms trapped on paper. There were sketches of star maps, equations about folding space, and scribbled words in the margins for all of us. For everyone, those words struck her like hidden fire. Her people never wrote for everyone. Every invention, every weapon, every plan was made for control, for victory, for power. But this human worked as if he carried the whole fragile weight of his species on his shoulders, and instead of seeing it as a burden, he treated it as hope. She found voice logs too, stored in glowing glass cylinders. At first, she thought they were secret codes, but when she activated one, Mason's voice filled the dark room. It was soft, almost tired, yet full of quiet passion. They think humanity is small. And maybe we are. But small things can surprise the universe. We don't want to rule the stars. We just want to reach them. Zira froze as the words echoed around her. Something inside her chest ached sharply, as if his voice had slipped past all her armor and touched something she didn't know was there. She turned the log off quickly, as if afraid it might burn her. Still, she kept coming back to listen. Every night, she listened. And every night, she felt something grow inside her, something strange and unwelcome. On the third night, it rained. The forest became a silver blur, raindrops drumming softly on the leaves. Zira stood on a branch outside his window, soaked and still. Inside, Mason sat at his desk, chin resting on his hand, watching the rain too. His face looked lonely in the dim light. Not sad, exactly just. Distant, as if part of him was somewhere far beyond the walls. He lifted a small photo frame from the table and stared at it for a long time. Zira sharpened her vision and saw the picture two smiling humans beside him. A woman and an older man. Family. Gone now, she guessed. By the way, his eyes softened and dimmed as he looked at them. He whispered something under his breath, but the glass muffled the words, for reasons she could not understand. Her chest tightened again. She thought about her own people. There were no pictures, no families, no smiles. They were all born from machines, raised by silence and training until they were ready to kill. No one ever paused to remember anyone. No one ever missed anyone. Watching Mason miss someone made her feel like the world beneath her feet was shifting. The days stretched on, and her hesitation grew heavier. Her training screamed at her to finish the mission, to end this softness before it infected her. But each time she lifted her weapon, her hands would not obey. It was like trying to force her body to cut through something delicate, a fragile bird or a living flame. She had never felt fear, but this wasn't fear. It was something far more dangerous. Doubt. One night, Mason fell asleep at his desk, his head resting on his folded arms, a pen still in his hand. The lamp beside him cast a warm halo around his sleeping form. Zira slipped inside, standing only a few feet from him. It would be so easy now. One strike, one breath, and it would be done. But as she stared at him, she realized something terrifying. She didn't want to. She had never wanted anything before. She only obeyed. Wanting was new. Wanting was dangerous. Instead of killing him, she simply stood there, listening to the quiet rhythm of his breathing. It was steady, soft, full of life. Her own heart beat too fast, too loud, like it was trying to break free from her chest. She turned and left before he could wake, disappearing into the forest like smoke. That night, she did not sleep. She sat in the high branches of a tree, staring at the distant stars. For the first time in her existence, she wondered what it would feel like not to be a weapon. And though she tried to crush it, the thought refused to die. Zyra told herself she wouldn't return that night. She repeated it like a command, like a shield against the strange pull inside her. Yet when darkness came and the forest quieted, she found her feet moving on their own silent steps, carrying her back to the house at the edge of the trees. She hated how easy it was to betray her own orders now. Mason Hale's lab glowed faintly with warm light. Through the window, she saw him, bent over a cluttered workbench, surrounded by tangled wires, papers, and humming machines. His shoulders slumped as though he carried invisible weight. He rubbed his eyes with one hand, exhausted, but he didn't stop working. He never seemed to stop. It was as if something inside him was brighter than his body could contain, and it wouldn't let him rest. She waited until he left the lab for a moment, probably to get more coffee. As he often didn't, then slipped silently through the open window. The air inside smelled like warm metal, paper, and faint traces of soap. Her feet touched the wooden floor without a sound. She moved quickly through the shadows, searching for his newest schematics. Something inside her wanted to understand why he worked so hard. If she could see the core of his dream, maybe she could finally destroy it, and him. That was what she told herself, though the thought rang hollow. She crouched near his main console and touched her wrist to it. A thin shimmer of alien code spread from her skin into the machine, copying his data into her neural implants. She was focused. Calm until the sound of footsteps froze her where she stood. He had returned. Zyra melted into the shadows between two shelves as Mason walked back in, a steaming mug in his hand. He set it down on the desk, humming softly under his breath, and leaned over the glowing screen. The light from the monitor painted his face in pale blue. His eyes flicked across the data, tired yet determined. Then he stopped. His eyes narrowed at the console, at the faint residue of her alien code flickering and fading on the screen. He reached for the keyboard and froze. Slowly, very slowly. He turned his head and looked directly at her. For the first time since arriving on Earth, Zyra's body betrayed her. She did not move, did not vanish, did not strike. She just stood there, caught in the amber of his gaze like an insect in ancient resin. Mason's eyes widened for only a moment. Not with fear more, with confusion. "Hello," he said softly. Zyra blinked. The sound of his voice, calm and steady, broke through her like sunlight through frozen glass. No human had ever spoken to her. No target had ever greeted their own assassin. He didn't run. He didn't scream. Instead, he slowly raised his hands not in surrender, but gently, like he was approaching a wild creature. "You're not supposed to be here," he said. His tone carried no anger, only quiet wonder. Zyra's instincts screamed at her to strike, to erase this moment before it could grow into something dangerous. But her body refused. "I am not here," she whispered, her voice unused to speaking in human words. It sounded strange in the warm air. Mason tilted his head slightly, studying her. "You're not from here, are you?" The words hit her like a shock. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't even surprised. He sounded almost curious. Zyra stayed silent. Mason's gaze softened. "I don't know who you are," he said gently, "but you look lost." The word made something twist deep inside her. Lost. She had never been lost before. She had always known her path, her purpose. But standing here, with this fragile human looking at her like she was something more than a weapon, she felt more lost than ever. He stepped back slightly, giving her space, as if he could sense the tension coiled inside her. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said quietly. "If you need something, you can just ask." No one had ever said that to her. Not in her entire existence. Her hands trembled. She could have killed him then. She could have ended the mission and silenced the strange, dangerous warmth he was stirring inside her. But she didn't. She couldn't. Instead, she did something she had never done before. She lowered her weapon. Mason blinked, surprised, but didn't move closer. He simply nodded, as if they had just made an unspoken agreement. He walked to a corner table, picked up a second mug, and poured warm coffee into it. Steam curled gently into the air. "Here," he said, placing it on the edge of the desk, far enough away to not threaten her. "You look cold." Zira stared at the mug, then at him. She didn't even know what cold felt like. Her kind didn't feel temperature the way humans did. Yet somehow, hearing him say it made her realize that she was cold not in her skin, but somewhere deeper. Mason smiled faintly, the corners of his tired eyes softening. "You don't have to stay," he said, "but if you do, you don't have to be afraid." Afraid, the word echoed inside her like a slow bell. She had been trained to fear nothing. But here, in this quiet room, with a man who should be dead by her hand offering her warmth instead of resistance, she finally understood fear. Not fear of death, fear of changing. Zira didn't take the mug. She only stared at it for a long moment. Then, without a word, she turned and slipped back out the window into the dark. But this time, when she vanished into the forest, her heart was beating like it was trying to break free. Asterisk. Zira did not sleep for 3 nights. She stayed high in the forest canopy, where the branches swayed like black skeletons against the silver moon, and tried to force her thoughts back into the rigid order she had always known. But they would not obey her anymore. They tangled and spiraled and pulled her back, again and again, to the warm glow of the house and to the human who had looked at her without fear. No one had ever looked at her like that. She kept replaying the moment the way Mason had stepped back to give her space. The way he had offered her warmth instead of violence. The way he had spoken to her as if she was not a monster or a threat, but simply someone. It was unbearable. It was beautiful, and it was breaking her because now the truth inside her was splitting like cracked glass. One side still held her mission, the iron weight of duty, of the oath she had sworn to her commanders, of the millions of voices behind her whispering order, silence, victory. The other side was soft, glowing, fragile. And it had Mason's voice inside it, saying, "You don't have to be afraid." She couldn't carry both sides. One had to be destroyed. So on the 4th night, when the moon hung like a pale wound in the sky, Zira climbed down from the trees and walked toward the house, not as a shadow this time, not as a hunter, but as something else she didn't have a name for. The grass bent silently under her feet as she crossed the clearing. The windows glimmered faintly with lamplight. Mason was awake. Of course. He always was. She found him in the lab, sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by scattered notebooks and glowing fragments of machinery. His hair was a messy halo around his tired face. When he looked up and saw her standing in the doorway, he didn't jump, didn't reach for a weapon, didn't call for help. He just gave her a small, quiet nod. "You came back," he said softly. Zira stood still for a long time. The words lodged in her chest like hooks. No one had ever been glad that she returned anywhere. Her people did not welcome. They only expected results. She stepped inside, her movements slow and uncertain. "I should not be here." "Maybe," Mason said. "But you are." That answer unraveled something inside her. She took another step, then another. And then she said the words that tasted like acid on her tongue. "I was sent to kill you." The silence that followed was heavy and sharp, like the pause before a blade falls. Mason blinked once. "Kill me," he repeated quietly, as if tasting the word. Yes, Zira's voice was flat, almost mechanical. It was the only way she could say it without shattering. You are considered a threat. Your work, your ideas. If you succeed, my people believe humans will spread chaos across the stars. My mission is to remove you. Mason didn't move. He didn't run or scream or even flinch. He just studied her with those calm, steady eyes, like she had just told him the weather might change. Are you going to? He asked. Zyra's throat tightened. Cannot? Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or something gentler. Why not? I don't know, she whispered. The words came out broken, like glass slipping from her mouth. I don't know what is wrong with me. Mason set down the tool he had been holding. He leaned back against the wall, folding his arms, his expression thoughtful rather than afraid. Maybe nothing is wrong with you, he said. Maybe something is finally right. Zyra stared at him, stunned. She had expected rage. She had expected fear, hatred, resistance. But not this. Not understanding. You don't hate me, she asked. He shook his head slowly. Why would I? You didn't choose to be who you are. Someone made you that way. That's not your fault. The words hit her harder than any weapon ever had. Her people never spoke of fault or choice. They spoke only of function. A blade does not choose to be sharp. It simply cuts. And yet here was this fragile human, speaking to her as if she was more than her function. As if she was something greater than the sharp edge she had been forced to become. Her vision blurred for a second. She didn't understand the feeling. Her eyes had never done that before. Mason picked up a small star map from the floor and held it out to her. Do you know what this is? Zyra shook her head. It's not a map of places we've been, he said. It's a map of places we hope to go. That's all I'm trying to build a way to reach them. Not to conquer. Not to take. Just to see what's out there. To not be alone anymore. Not be alone. Those words burned through her like fire in frozen stone, because she realized, with a sudden, painful clarity, that she had been alone her entire life, had never even known it until this moment. Her voice trembled when she spoke. My people will not stop. If they know I failed, they will send others. Then we'll just have to be ready for them, Mason said. His smile was small and tired, but steady. Maybe we can show them something better. Zyra's chest ached. She didn't know what to call this feeling. It wasn't weakness, though her training screamed that it was. It wasn't fear. It wasn't duty. It was something softer, something terrifying and bright. She stood there for a long time, staring at him, the human she had been sent to erase from existence, and for the first time in her life, she wished her mission had never existed at all. For the next 3 days, the world seemed to slow down around Zyra, as if time itself was holding its breath, waiting to see which side of her would win. She stayed close to the house now, moving through its corridors like a restless shadow. Mason never stopped her, never asked her to leave. He just carried on with his strange work, scribbling calculations on the walls, welding scraps of metal into odd skeletal shapes, talking to himself in that quiet, thoughtful way that somehow made her chest ache. And while he worked, Zyra battled herself. Her training screamed at her from every hidden corner of her mind. It reminded her of the oaths she had sworn, the codes etched into her bones. It whispered the voices of her commanders. Eliminate threats. Secure order. Protect the empire. But there was something else now. Something stubborn and fragile, growing like a spark in the cold. She had seen his dreams. Not the kind people spoke aloud, but the ones that glimmered behind Mason's eyes when he thought no one was watching. He wasn't building weapons. He was building bridges, machines that could fold space, stretch light, open doors to distant stars. He wasn't trying to destroy anything. He was trying to belong, and that was what terrified her most. Because if she killed him, she would not just be ending a life. She would be erasing something rare, someone who wanted to make the universe bigger instead of smaller. The thought made her stomach twist. Each night, she stood on the roof, looking out at the forest while the wind whispered cold around her. Her weapon sat heavy in her hands, familiar and foreign all at once. The sleek black alloy had always felt like an extension of her own body. Now it felt like a stranger's hand pressed against her palm, waiting for her to make a choice. One night, as the moon spilled pale light across the grass, Mason joined her on the roof. He didn't say anything at first, just stood beside her, hands tucked into his jacket pockets, eyes tilted toward the stars. "You know," he said, eventually, "most people spend their whole lives trying to find their purpose. You were given one. I can't imagine how heavy that must feel." She didn't answer. "Thing is," he continued, "just because someone gave it to you, doesn't mean it has to be yours." The words hit her like a silent explosion. No one had ever told her that. No one had ever suggested she could choose who she was. Her purpose had always been a cage disguised as destiny, and she had worn it like armor because she didn't know there was anything else. Now here he was, offering her a key. She turned her head, watching him in the soft moonlight. He wasn't extraordinary to look at, just a tired man with messy hair and a stubborn spark in his eyes. But somehow he carried entire galaxies in the way he spoke, as if he believed the universe could still be gentle if someone tried hard enough. And, for the first time, she wanted to believe it too. But the cost. Her people would call her traitor. They would hunt her. They would burn her name from their memory, erase every trace of her existence. She would become nothing. And yet, when she pictured Mason lying dead at her feet, the stars dimmed. The air froze. The thought hollowed her out like a collapsing star. She realized then that the choice had already been made. She had just been too afraid to admit it. She could not kill him, even if it meant war, even if it meant exile, even if it meant becoming the thing her people feared most, a weapon that had learned how to feel. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of earth and pine. Mason looked at her and smiled, that quiet, stubborn smile that always undid her. "I won't stop you," he said softly. "If you decide to do it, I just hope you don't." Something inside her cracked. It's not like breaking glass, but like ice melting under sunlight. She stepped closer. Slowly, deliberately, she opened her hand and let her weapon fall. It landed on the roof tiles with a dull metallic thud, and the sound echoed like a heartbeat. Mason didn't move. He just kept watching her, his eyes calm and steady. "It's done," she whispered. He nodded once, almost solemnly, as if he understood the enormity of what she had just done, even if she barely did herself. For the first time in her life, she was no longer what they had made her. For the first time in her life, she belonged only to herself. And as she stood beside Mason beneath the endless stars, Zyra felt something new bloom quietly in her chest, fragile and fierce. Hope *, the peace did not last. It never could. For a few fragile days, life settled into something that almost felt like living. Zyra helped Mason in the lab, her sharp alien precision fitting strangely well alongside his chaotic human creativity. She soldered circuits that trembled like veins of light, held components steady while he muttered equations to himself. And sometimes, when the silence stretched to long, heat would play old Earth music from a battered radio and hum along under his breath. It was disarming. It was dangerous. It was beautiful. But even beauty could not stop the shadows from finding them. The first sign came as a whisper in her mind, like cold fingers brushing the edges of her thoughts. At first, she thought it was just memory, some ghost of the link that had once tethered her to the collective. But then it sharpened, piercing, unmistakable. A signal. They had found her. She was in the workshop when it hit her like a blade of ice. The tool slipped from her hands, clattering across the table. Mason looked up instantly, concern creasing his face. "What is it?" he asked. Her voice came out hollow. "They are coming." Mason's eyes flickered, not with fear, never with fear, but with quick, focused calculation. "How many?" "I do not know." Her pulse thundered in her ears. Enough, she could almost see them already, shapes cutting through the void. Cloaked ships gliding silent as predators. Her sisters, her kin. Trained as she was, forged as she had been, and untouched by doubt. They would not hesitate. They would not fail. They were coming to finish what she had refused to do. Mason stood still for one heartbeat, then another, and then he moved fast, efficient. He began sweeping armfuls of notebooks and data drives into a pack, snapping shut cases of equipment. Flicking switches that plunged parts of the lab into darkness. "We have to go," he said. Zira stared at him. "There is nowhere safe." "Then we'll make somewhere." He slung the pack over his shoulder, "'Kay?" and gave her a look that was sharp and steady all at once. "I'm not going to let them take you." The words struck something deep inside her. Something that trembled like glass under strain. Not going to let them take you. No one had ever said that to her. No one had ever wanted her enough to fight for her. For one wild, impossible moment, she believed they might outrun fate. They left in the hour before dawn. When the world was still wrapped in pale fog, Mason guided them through the forest with a handheld scanner, while Zira ghosted ahead, senses stretched wide. She could feel the air vibrating with distant engines now still far away, but closing fast, like thunder rolling over the horizon. By midday, they reached the canyon. Mason scrambled down the jagged rocks with awkward determination, while Zira moved like flowing shadow. At the bottom lay an old transport skimmer half buried under twisted metal. Mason dropped to his knees beside it, hands already digging through wires and panels. "This thing hasn't flown in years," he muttered. "Can you fix it?" she asked. "I can try." While he worked, she stood guard, scanning the sky. The clouds were streaked thin and white, innocent to human eyes. But she could see the ripples in the upper atmosphere where cloaked ships disturbed the air. They were close now. Too close. Mason cursed softly, sparks flaring from a console. Almost. Almost. Then, with a shudder like an awakening beast, the skimmer roared to life. They launched into the canyon wind just as the first hunter ship broke through the clouds above them. It appeared like a blade splitting the sky, black and silent. Its hull glowing with the cold light of the collective. Zira's breath caught. She knew that ship. She knew the pilot, Tellin, her closest sister. The one she had trained beside, bled beside. Trusted more than anyone. Talon would not hesitate. The skimmer tore through the canyon like a streak of silver lightning. Mason clung to the controls, teeth bared in concentration, while Zira climbed onto the outer hull and drew the pulse rifle. She had once sworn she would never use again. The hunter ship descended in pursuit. Silent as a shadow, deadly as grief. Wind screamed in her ears as the chase began. Rocks blurred past in streaks of gray and rust. The air burned in her lungs. Every instinct in her body begged her to submit, to surrender, to let her people take her home. But there was no home any more, only the man below her who had seen her as more than a weapon, and the impossible hope he carried in his fragile human heart. She raised her rifle. The sky erupted with fire.